Welcome to another explainer. We've got an absolutely fascinating one for you today. We're looking at a concept drawn from Thomas Alethea's work on building a good life. But, before we even touch the psychological theory, I want to plunge you straight into a deeply embarrassing, honestly kind of rage-inducing moment from the author's own life. Just picture this. You're in a room, you're pouring your absolute heart out about a super painful personal failure, and someone looks right at you and just starts laughing. Okay, let's dive into this. So the author had just lost out on this job he really wanted. He applied, he got rejected, and he's in a group meeting just bemoaning his fate. He is completely wrapped up in his own tragedy, putting his self-pity on full display for everyone to see. And this one guy in the room, a man affectionately known as Chatty Bob, precisely because he literally almost never talked, well, Chatty Bob just starts laughing at him, out loud.
Yeah, he just laughed at his self-pity. Now, as you can probably imagine, the author was furious. Just think about that bubbling rage. I mean, how dare this guy laugh at his genuine pain, right? But then the narrative completely pivots. After that initial wave of hot, righteous anger finally subsided, the author had this incredibly startling realization. Chatty Bob's laughter, it wasn't some cruel insult at all. It was actually a massive, massive favor. It was a giant wake-up call to reality.
So here is the crucial point we need to talk about. What actually happens when we absolutely refuse to see the humor in our own struggles? The source text calls this the dangerous dance, self-pity and fragility. See, when you take yourself way too seriously, your heightened sense of personal importance turns every single little setback into a massive, catastrophic blow to your ego. You basically become like this piece of delicate glass, totally liable to shatter completely under the weight of life's inevitable adversities. Treating every single challenge as a personal slight, it just snowballs into a highly, highly fragile state of self-pity.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the actual anatomy of the mind and why we get so incredibly defensive in the first place. The core realization here is that you are not your thoughts, you are not your feelings, and you are definitely not your ego. You are just awareness. The author points out that our thoughts dangerously masquerade as our actual identity. We just kind of buy into them and mistake them for who we really are. But actually, scratch that. You don't think your thoughts, you just experience them. When we confuse our ego with our true self, we become fiercely, irrationally protective of it.
Let me ask you something directly. How fragile is your own worldview when things don't go your way? Do you ever notice how quickly you just assume an event is entirely about you? Well, that brings us to a massive psychological trap called egocentric bias. Basically, this is a cognitive blind spot where we tend to see ourselves as far more central and influential in events than we really are. It is literally seeing yourself as the center of the universe. And honestly, when we operate from this bias, it's really no wonder we take everything so seriously, right? We genuinely believe our own minor failures are these grand cosmic tragedies.
And this totally self-centered worldview feeds right into our next mental trap, the fundamental attribution error. This is where we sharply contrast how we excuse our own behavior with how we judge others. We attribute the behavior of other people to internal flaws, like their personality, while totally overlooking external, situational factors. The source gives this perfect everyday example. If you see a classmate arriving late, you instantly assume, oh, they're just lazy or irresponsible. But if you are late, well, obviously it's because the traffic was terrible. We constantly give ourselves the benefit of context, but we judge everyone else by their perceived flaws, which just fiercely reinforces our own fragile ego.
All of these traps, they build up into an entire massive system of self-deception. We justify our fragile egos through this wild web of lies. We tell ourselves it's true because I believe it, it's true because we believe it, or it's true simply because I want to believe it. Maybe because I've always believed it, or just because it's in my selfish interest to believe it. It's wild. The author actually reveals a shocking statistic from a psychological test he took. A whopping 85% of the time, our minds filter and distort reality just to protect our fragile self-image. We are literally lying to ourselves 85% of the time to keep our ego safe.
So, connecting these cognitive biases right back to our opening anecdote, we can see exactly why the author was so utterly miserable when Chatty Bob laughed at him. He was totally trapped in this destructive cycle, falsely believing that self-righteous anger, judging others, and placing blame would somehow magically fix things. He was stuck in this suffocating little box of self-righteous blame over not getting that job. He was using all those biases and all those lies we just talked about to protect his ego, which basically made his unhappiness completely inevitable. Chatty Bob's laugh? That was the pin that finally popped that ridiculous balloon.
Okay, so the big question, how do we pop our own balloons? The source introduces an incredibly rigorous tool to unmask the ego and find the real root cause of our daily miseries. We're going to look at something called the screaming alarm clock technique. This is actually a highly practical application of Socratic questioning. It's a systematic, highly disciplined way of digging through your own thoughts to reveal the underlying assumptions that you're hiding from yourself.
Let's move to and see how this builds in a deeply relatable real-world scenario. Step 1. Why am I late? Well, because I hit snooze. Step 2. Why I hit snooze? Because I'm still tired. Step 3. Why still tired? Because I stayed up late. Step 4. Why up late? Because I was endlessly scrolling on my phone. Step 5. Why scrolling? Because I do not want to face tomorrow. Wow. Just think about that. What started as a superficial complaint about hitting an alarm clock reveals a much deeper, hidden fear about facing the next day. This perfectly illustrates exactly how our minds actively obscure the real causes of our problems.
And this brilliantly illustrates the fundamental mental shift we need to actually escape that suffocating trap of self-pity. First, you have to notice the judging perspective. It sounds like this. Whose fault is it? What is wrong with me? Why is everybody else so stupid and frustrating? That right there, that is your ego talking. Now, contrast that with the learning perspective. What works? What am I responsible for? What can I learn? What is useful about this? Shifting from judging to learning is the exact mechanism that strips the ego of its power and finally gets you out of the self-pity trap.
To really cement this mental shift, the source text asks us to intentionally de-escalate the stakes of our lives. Just pause for a second and picture yourself as a tiny spark of consciousness floating in a vast, infinite cosmos. When you consciously shrink your perceived, ego-driven concerns against the literal backdrop of the entire universe, doesn't that missed job opportunity or that frustrating morning commute seem just a little bit less catastrophic?
Which brings us right back to our silent friend, Chatty Bob, and this incredibly powerful old adage. Do not wait 5 years to laugh at this. The practical wisdom here is that having a sense of humor and truly recognizing the absolute absurdity of your own ego is the ultimate antidote to fragility. Chatty Bob didn't wait 5 years to see the humor in the author's self-pity. He laughed right then and there. And in doing so, he showed the author exactly how to stop taking himself so seriously.
So the absolutely crucial question I want to leave you with is this. Will you wait 5 years to laugh, or will you start today? The very next time you face a daily setback, the next time your ego gets bruised and you just want to throw yourself a massive pity party, remember Chatty Bob. Apply the lessons from this explainer directly to your own life. Step outside your ego, look at the bigger cosmic picture, and for goodness sake, just stop taking yourself so seriously. It might just be the most liberating thing you do all day. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep learning.